Thank you very much. Mr. Olikara, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee. It's an honor to join you today. My name is Stephen Olikara. I'm the founder and president of the Millennial Action Project, or MAP for short. We are the largest nonpartisan organization of millennial policymakers in the United States. In 2013, we organized the first ever bipartisan caucus for millennials here in Congress called the Future Caucus. And since then, we've expanded that model into 26 states. Today, we engage over 600 millennial policymakers and thousands of millennial leaders across the United States. I would like to recognize Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, who serves as the vice chair of our Future Caucus, and Congresswoman Velasquez, who is a member as well and probably has the highest concentration of millennials in her district. I've been there. It's a lot of fun. MAP and its Future Caucus network are on the front lines of creating and adapting policies to support this new economy. When we founded MAP in 2013, we noticed that millennial entrepreneurs were creating this new wave of gig work, most notably ride-sharing services at the time. This new sharing economy was not only disrupting old and incumbent industries, but it was also disrupting old and outdated government regulations. Not surprisingly, our millennial lawmakers, Democrats, Republicans, and independents were early adopters. They were rejecting the false choice between innovation and safety. They brought both parties together to create the first state laws authorizing these services while also putting in place crucial consumer protections. Through a MAP, we helped bring these best practices together from around the country. And interestingly, the divide that emerged was not so much between the left versus the right. It was really the future versus the past. Now, since then, entrepreneurs have expanded these on-demand services to many other industries, from meal delivery to hospitality, which really highlights millennials' peer-to-peer network-driven approach to solving problems. Other millennials, as we've already discussed here, are simply choosing to be their own bosses and pursuing their passions, perhaps as a creative freelancer or a consultant on socially responsible business. We know from studies that this generation of workers will not likely spend their entire career at one company. Increasingly, we'll see workers moving from gig to gig. At their best, these opportunities will unleash creativity, create a more dynamic U.S. economy, and provide more flexibility to engage in work that best fits the worker. However, this emerging gig workforce also raises a number of issues, from access to health benefits, to retirement security, to disability and unemployment insurance. In short, the social contract we created in the 20th century needs to be updated for the 21st century. For context on why these opportunities are important, the unemployment rate among millennials today remains above the national average, around 8.5%. And that doesn't include the roughly 50% of millennials who report feeling underemployed. So while we're the largest workforce in the United States today, the labor force participation rate in this age range has actually declined over the past decade, the lowest growth rate among all generations. At the same time, we're seeing gig work growing. Actually, the growth rate for gig work is outpacing the overall employment growth in our country. And millennials are disproportionately taking on this work. Not only that, studies have found that millennials are more willingly choosing this type of work, preferring the added flexibility. At the same time, millennials are undergoing this work with high debt levels because of student debt and limited access to benefits. So while the proportion of household income millennials receive from gig work is increasing, most millennial gig workers make less than their traditional full-time employed counterparts. So with these trends, we need to consider the disruption between the traditional employee and employer relationship, particularly around those benefits that are difficult or impossible to obtain in this independent workforce. And if you take retirement as an issue, for example, if you look at the long-term trends, millennials are likely to have lower income replacement from Social Security, less likely to have traditional pensions, and more likely to have higher life expectancies. So our country cannot afford to have a gig economy that depresses retirement savings. We need to create an economy that does the opposite. We also need to look at the portability of benefits from gig to gig, such as healthcare, retirement savings, workers' comp, and others. States, as the laboratories of innovation, are already drafting their own legislative plans that would allow employees to move from gig to gig more seamlessly. And at the federal level, there's already bipartisan legislation by Future Caucus member Senator Todd Young, along with Senator Mark Warner, that would further support this type of experimentation at the state and local level. As the gig workforce grows, we need to be proactive in creating this 21st century social contract, because studies show this workforce is only going to grow. And about 42% of these workers by 2020 will be millennials. I often hear from my millennial friends that they feel penalized for moving between jobs to jobs as they're pursuing their passions. We need to take steps to support this backbone of the U.S. economy so it's properly supported to promote innovation, provide security for workers, and maximize this new generation's potential for economic growth. Again, I want to thank Chairman Shabbat and Ranking Member Velazquez and all of those on the committee for inviting me to speak on this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the members will have 5 minutes to ask questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Dogert, I'll begin with you. Just how cool is it to be a graduate of the College of William and Mary? No. No.
Chairman Shabbat, it is fantastic. Pride for life.
Enough said. I yield back my time. No.
That's settled.
Now my real question. We didn't prearrange this, right? My real question. You mentioned that only a third of millennials successfully received the financing that they sought. In general, I know it varies every time, but what do the other 2/3 then do? Do they not ever get off the ground? Do they not expand? Do they, or do they find some other way? Or what do you hear out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to recap, the exact statistics are that a third of millennials are seeking financing for their small businesses, and a third of that third are successfully obtaining it. So it's actually even a gloomier picture than what you might think initially. And that is actually true for the greater population of small business owners as well. We know that only about a quarter of them are successfully obtaining financing in the traditional sense, loans and grants. So what our small business owner clients at SCORE are telling us that they do instead is a lot of self-funding. So the average small business is started on about $10,000 or less, and people are turning to methods such as credit cards, crowdfunding, family loans, and personal loans to finance their small businesses.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Morris, I'll go to you next. Again, thank you for your service to our country. How did the skills that you picked up in the Marine Corps translate to your success in the private sector? And you've obviously done very well. How would you respond to that?
Thank you, sir. Well, the Marine Corps, as you know, is the best service out there, right? And they set you up for success. They give you that mindset that you do things right the first time, so you don't have to, do it over and over and over again. And again, being what I did in the Marine Corps, it gives you the different challenges of dealing with people who are, from this place who've never done this job, whatever that may be, and you have to adapt. And one thing that the Marine Corps does is teach you how to adapt. It will make you an adult even if you're not ready. So I think that's how, the military has helped me succeed, just knowing that, you got one shot and sometimes that's all you get.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Kirby, I'll go to you next. Could you discuss, you mentioned SCORE had been important. Would you tell us how SCORE did impact your business, and either early on or how it's still continuing to affect you?
SCORE has been an amazing asset, not just for my business, but for majority of our members are either SCORE clients or actually participate in SCORE workshops or roundtables and activities. But for me personally, with my mentor, he really helped me step outside of my day-to-day and helped me kind of take a third-party perspective and a hard look at my company. I was running multiple projects, and I really needed someone to kind of step in and help me assess the numbers, take a look at HR issues that I was having. So I came to SCORE a little later in my career. A lot of individuals will go to SCORE initially, like I have this idea, help me get this rolling. But I really feel that SCORE is beneficial for companies no matter what phase of development or that they are in. And I came to them later in my career because of the growth that we were seeing, and I needed help navigating that. The other thing is they really become a family. They wrap the mentors really come to the table, I have found, bringing their expertise and then also their referrals and their networks, which is just such an important asset to a small business who's looking to grow.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Mr. Olikara, I know it's hard to predict the future, but how do you see the gig economy changing as millennials age, and do you see any further out what's coming beyond that with future generations? How do you see all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to see a rapid expansion of the gig economy, and it's going to, again, we're just seeing the beginning of the types of industries that it can enter into because of the increasing need for on-demand services and demand for that. You're going to see millennial entrepreneurs create all sorts of businesses to make our lives easier. But then on the flip side, as you project out over the next 10 to 20 years, as this workforce is aging and they're thinking about starting families and buying cars and buying houses, then we have to make sure that they have some basic security that undergirds that type of work. So you're going to have some dynamic entrepreneurs creating the services, and then you're going to have a number of gig-style workers who will be not employed, but working as 1099 employees primarily in those services. And I think if we provide some basic level of security for those workers, that can serve as a platform for more and more innovation. And I think the entrepreneurs starting those businesses want to see their workers properly supported.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. The ranking member, gentlelady from New York, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and really has been quite an interesting panel. Thank you so much for being here. Mr. Olikara, I have 200,000 millennials in my district.
Do you like all of them?
A lot of energy. It's a lot of energy, I can tell you that. We did an event in my district where we have a panel such as this one to listen to them. So, Mr. Olikara, our nation's student loan debt is nearing $1.5 trillion, and small business startups are lagging.
Right.
What can we do to help millennial entrepreneurs deal with their student loan debt while trying to start a business?
Thank you, Congresswoman. This is a huge, huge issue for millennials. The student loan debt crisis is weighing down millennial entrepreneurship right now. Currently, if you total student loan debt, it exceeds credit card debt in this country, and roughly each millennial has about $26,500 of a student loan debt. And what's interesting is that picture is contrasting this other picture that's emerging of millennials who want to start businesses.
Right.
The Kauffman Foundation found that over half of millennials have either started businesses or would like to start one. And the first thing you need when you start a business is financing. And if you're not personally wealthy yourself, you have to go out and find other forms of financing. So I think there are a couple things we need to look at. One is that we can help incentivize employers to provide student loan repayment programs. So the jobs that millennials have prior to starting their businesses could help start to pay down their student loan debt. And then for other millennials who are deciding to perhaps go into public service, we need to have a stronger public service loan deferment or forgiveness for those millennials. But I think the big picture here is it's not important just for millennials, it's important for the entire economy because studies have found since 1980, virtually all net new job creation has come from these types of startups. So if we want to see economic growth for the entire country, we need to do a lot more to reduce the burden of student loan debt on millennials.
I invite you to look into my legislation, H.R. 201, to reward young entrepreneurs by offering loan forgiveness when they start a business. Ms. Doggart, the gig economy has changed the way employees and business owners are defined. What is the primary difference between a solopreneur and an employee, and why would a worker want to be a solopreneur instead of an employee?
Thank you for the question. So when we're talking about solopreneurs and non-employer firms, we're referring to small businesses that technically have 0 employees, but as the statistics are showing, are employing an average of 2.2 people beyond themselves to run their business operations. So while there are no employees helping out, there are gig workers helping to run these solopreneur and non-employer firms and operations.
Anything else?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Ms. Kirby, thank you. As an entrepreneur who is also a mother, can you talk about the opportunities and challenges that mothers working in the gig economy face?
Well, there's a lot. Speaking to debt, which I think, and access to financing is definitely always an issue across the board. As for mothers, childcare, we're finding a lot of women who would like the opportunity to be able to explore their passions, but feel that the cost of childcare is cost prohibitive, and they are choosing not to explore those businesses. We're looking at solutions of co-working and childcare, so childcare being provided within our co-working spaces. That's definitely something that's on the rise that we're seeing more and more of. As a female entrepreneur, I also run a networking group called Kick-Ass Female Entrepreneurs with 1,200 women throughout Central PA, and childcare is probably one of the number one issues that we face.
Well, the Democratic Women Caucus have 4 pillars, and one of them is childcare to help women. Mr. Olikara, over 20 million people gained health insurance through the ACA, but the continual effort to undermine the law has undone much of this accomplishment. Can you talk about the importance of the ACA and the access to adequate health care for millennial entrepreneurs?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. Well, it's been extremely helpful, not only for this emerging workforce, but for me personally. I used to be in the gig economy, and one of the most important things during that time period was being able to stay on my parents' health insurance plan because I was under the age of 26 at that time. And I remember thinking as I was taking advantage of those benefits that I wish we could just take the partisanship out of that issue, because if you think about it, that provision in the healthcare law has helped bolster the entrepreneurial prospects of a generation of young people who otherwise wouldn't have that type of health security. So I think that is extremely powerful and relates to the earlier point I was making in terms of creating this platform for young entrepreneurs to succeed. That includes healthcare benefits, but also many of the other benefits that we've been talking about. It's not so much a debate, in my opinion, between big and small government. It's how government can be a jumping off point for entrepreneurs to succeed and create growth in the economy.
Thank you.
Thank you. The ranking member's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony. I'm sitting here thinking how things might have changed. I was a young entrepreneur in 1975 when I looked around, and I came home and I told my wife, today I'm a man, and she looked at me with that bored, well, what else is new? Well, it actually was new because I had decided to take responsibility for our lives together. And a couple of months later, I managed to convince the banker to loan me 100% to buy an old beaten-up bulldozer. And the rest is, I guess, a long saga of ups and downs that today is a second-generation company that's, I think, very successful, at least by my standards. And a week ago Monday, the banker that loaned me that money and took a bit of risk to do so passed away, and we celebrated his life, how many of our lives he changed with that financing. And just through the things that enabled me to do, from a company that's spreading out and taking care of the third generation of my family, the politics that flowed from it, the career that flowed from it. My message to them was, there's a lot of us that had a wonderful life because of the one wonderful thing that he did. So when I listened to the difficulty in reaching financing, Ms. Duggart, and I did 1/3 of 1/3 is 1 out of 9. And so I want to ask you first, what are some of the reasons for turning down the finances on that? What are some of the barriers that are there? Are they different now than they were then?
Sorry, can you clarify turning down? You mean why?
Yeah, when they're denied financing, I'm going to say here's some things I know. Like, you don't have a cash flow plan that works. You don't have any capital. We don't really measure that you have the character to come through, the judgment of those kind of things. Or what is that generally still the same reasons that were there 43 years ago when I began a business? Because I had a few that said no to me. I had to find a way to sell them. And so, and I think this Marine knows how to solve some of these problems too, but you can't let up. And so what I'm trying to get to is yes, we have a gig economy going on, and that's a result of a number of things, and you've described some of that, but the barriers seem to be the same to me. You have to have the instinct and the intuition to find a way to penetrate in, get your start. Maybe I'll swing over here to Ms. Kirby. You've done this. You've got this operation going on with about 16,000 square feet and lots of people churning around in there. Can you tell us a little more about day to day? I didn't get that out of your testimony. How'd this get built? What's it look like when you walk in there and you see this buzz of activity? Tell me how that all came together in your mind and how it looks today.
Well, I was working from home, and I was really isolated, so I was looking for opportunities to network. And I started a group called the Creative House of Lancaster back in 2007. And that was just a meetup, basically, of freelancers and creatives. And we started just getting together once a month, and we identified a need fairly quickly that we were all kind of working from home and isolated and needed that support. So what I did was I grew a community for 3 years before I opened up the co-working space. And that's something that we actually advocate for a lot of co-working spaces to do. It's not a if you build it, they will come kind of philosophy. If you can grow that community first, then you have the support that you need. We opened our doors in 2010 with 15 members, and we were completely sustainable because we asked those members to come to the table and actually help get the space open. That was when we first started in our first location, which was about 5,000 square feet, and we have grown to 2 locations and 16,000 square feet. Again, we just go back to our community. We say, hey, together we can actually, share space, share resources.
Did you have trouble with financing?
So it was really funded by the membership, and because I run my design and marketing company out of the candy factory, I actually don't pull any salary from the candy factory, so it's all reinvested into the growth of it.
Okay, I get it. You're a natural entrepreneur. You saw the need, you built your company, you saw the need, you built the community, and then the demand is what set this up then.
Right.
And I would say that to anybody out there is that don't grow to anticipated demand, but grow to that demand that exists so that you're satisfying your customers. Just as my clock ticks down, I just want to say that my observations are that there are some barriers that are greater than there used to be. And I believe one of them is the ACA because we have unaffordable health care. And the other one is Dodd-Frank and achieving finances. I talk to bankers consistently, and they say, I can't give those kind of loans anymore because I'm too tied down by too much heavy regulation. So I think some of these solutions are is open the door up so that a little more risk can be taken by the lenders, and they can take the risk with the borrowers. And another thing that if the chairman will indulge me in just a concluding statement here, is that I think that your generation, the youngest among you anyway, has lost something that used to be. And that is that young people, when I was a young man looking at these, we'd look around, we'd come up with an idea, and we'd say, well, there's no law against it. It meets our moral standards, let's go do it. Now I hear, nobody's doing this, there must be a rule against it, I guess we have to get permission. If you think in terms of you have to get permission, it's a lot harder to be a successful and robust entrepreneur. So I appreciate the testimony here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, balance my time.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask this question to the panel as we talk about this gig economy. The current subcontracting process is vast and sometimes complex, while the contracting economy ever emerging with the gig economy. So I'm interested in asking you that question across the board, because you described this gig economy, and then we have the subcontracting process. Obviously, the federal government is huge as opportunity. Is there some way you view in terms of bringing that together, the contracting economy merging with the gig economy? In your thoughts? Any start down the line, Steve? Mm-hmm.
Sure. All right.
Like you have a reaction already.
I always have a reaction. Well, Well, I think if I understand your question correctly, you have the contract economy and the gig economy, and
Correct.
those create slightly different types of work.
Correct.
And then creates potentially some confusion as you're thinking about benefits and just doing your taxes and things of that nature. That's an interesting point that I honestly hadn't thought of previously, but I do think if there was some level of merging between all of the paperwork that's required for those separate economies, then I do think it would make it to be a more seamless and easy process for the workers who are going through this. I'll say is, in the early days of being an entrepreneur, I was self-employed, and I remember thinking just the difficulty of dealing with all the paperwork and all the things that you actually take for granted when you have a traditional employer. So I think the things that we can do to make that easier for these young entrepreneurs, especially in those early days when they're just starting out, would be very helpful.
One thing that we try to do, kind of piggybacking off of that, is we really try to get small businesses, or if you have an idea, to the resources that they need as soon as possible. And that's why I think co-working is so essential, is because we become these pipelines. And I really think that helping identify what you are how you incorporate and your business plan, and figuring out taxes, which is incredibly difficult, kind of helps define contract versus freelancer, that kind of thing. But I think it's really access to resource and support and information. And I think that that's something that we need to keep continuing to grow.
Any thoughts on you, Mr. Morris? None?
No, sir.
No, sir. Any thoughts?
I think another important step to take going forward is to make sure that we are properly counting these types of workers, because right now you hear a lot of different terminology from the workers themselves being independent contractors, freelancers, gig economy workers, and then on the small business side, non-employer firms, solopreneur firms. And we know that some of these gig workers may in fact be running small businesses and not even realize it, and just think of themselves as a babysitter, a part-time dog walker. So I think until we know who exactly we're talking about and how many of them there are, we will possibly be underestimating the economic impact. And I think that that is a good first step.
Ms. Kirby, the prediction that the majority of U.S. workforce will be freelance by 2027. Does this mean the end of traditional companies as we know it? And what is the most prevalent big gig business in Lancaster? Since I'm from the great state of Pennsylvania,
Yes.
I mean, I know, right?
Well, what we're seeing is more and more companies are seeing the value in hiring freelancers. They're saving time, money, onboarding, all of that. So that's one thing that we're seeing as why this is growing so rapidly. And the benefit it can actually have for small businesses as a whole is being able to bring these contractors in who are experts, and then their companies can scale. That's something that we do with the Sweet Core, is that we're a small team of 6, but as a company comes to us and has specific needs, we can bring in experts from in-house, from the candy factory, and scale as we need it. So I think that that's a huge benefit. I think for the largest gig company you were saying in
Yes, in Lancaster, yes.
Oh, well, that's a good one. I'm not 100% sure. I can actually get that information and send that to you in writing if that's okay.
Mr. Morrison, again, thank you for your service. Obviously, as a former member of the military, you probably had an ideal person to start your business requiring discipline, motivation, ability. Who are your role models as you was pushing to think about entering this aspect of dealing with the economy?
That's a great question. And surprisingly enough, some of my inspiration, so to speak, would be some of the people that were my officers who looked at me and said, in so many words, I don't see anything in you. And a lot of times, it's those who kind of push you down that help you. You say, and this is what was in my mind when I started this. One day you're going to work for me. So that was my motivation. I don't care how old you are, you're going to work for me one day. So that was my motivation.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent answer. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. Mr. Morris, thank you for your service to our country, and I love your attitude.
Thank you, sir.
As I'm thinking of the gig economy, whatever we call this, I'm 63, so back in my day, we used to think of your retirement as a three-legged stool, of which the person contributed to their retirement, the corporation, back in those days that they worked for 20, 30, 40 years, contributed to their retirement, and then lastly, the government contributed to it. And when I hear about the gig, the entrepreneurial type of economy, what immediately comes to my mind is, so that corporate piece, and most, not all, most corporations offer 401k, they offer health insurance, they offer disability, they offer some type of retirement plans. If you're home in your garage, and I was one of those folks, working for yourself, you don't have those benefits. I somewhat see this trend putting pressure on our rapidly depleting government social program resources. The trustees report just came out yesterday, and Social Security, they say, will be out of money in 2034, and Medicare will be out of money in 8 years, 2026. Not having a corporation there to help you with some of these things. Can you tell me about, what are your thoughts about that? A lot of people stay at companies because they have a retirement, which takes some of the pressure off the government. Because they have benefits, takes pressure off the government. When you're doing your own thing, which I did, which I think is great, you don't have those things. So all of a sudden, when you're in need, it's falling pretty much solely on the government. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and those statistics are certainly sobering. I think that millennial gig economy workers are incredibly self-motivated as a group. That's part of their success, is that they are excited about getting out of bed every morning and pursuing successful work that they believe in, and they value freedom and flexibility. But with great freedom comes responsibility. So we would hope, and some statistics are pointing to millennial gig economy workers making enough money that they could potentially be putting it aside for their own retirement and health care and long-term planning. So this is an incredibly motivated and smart group of individuals, and I would certainly hope that they are planning to continue taking care of themselves as much as they can.
Mr. Morris?
Me personally, I think that the millennials now are so concerned about right now. You know, we got the Instagram or the Facebook and all of these things that give information right now. I think the job market, at least as far as the freelancing is concerned, is in that same kind of path. I want something right now. And like I said, I started my business because I wanted a massage chair. There was no, future, I want a big house, in 30 years. I just wanted a massage chair. And it's turned into this, I'll call it an empire, but it's turned into this empire that, has been wonderful for me. So I don't honestly know if we are thinking of retirement or Medicaid, Medicare, whatever, because, we're young, we're healthy, and, we're not worried about those things right now. That's my thoughts.
And that's a concern for the government. That would be of concern. I mean, our savings rate, I think, is not very high in this country, maybe 1%. Yeah. So I'm just concerned that because we're thinking the here and now, that there's not being money set aside. Whereas I'm not advocating working for big corporations, don't get me wrong. I'm just concerned about the rapidly depleting government resources, that the money's not set aside. Ms. Kirby?
I'm optimistic. I mean, I see some amazing, creative, innovative, young, individuals working out of our space who are actually coming up with ways to be able to save money. We have a 19-year-old software developer who is investing. It comes down to education. He had education to learn how to properly invest, to properly save. I think a lot of people have kind of missed that. So I think resources and education are really key. But I am seeing our members kind of rally behind each other as well and collectively try to support each other. But I think that those are all topics that are top of mind for this generation as well as the rest of us who are self-employed. And so trying to come up with creative solutions to help as much as possible, like the medical membership program, that kind of thing. How do we reduce some of the costs so that we can save more and we can give back more as well? And maybe that happens collectively.
If the chair would indulge me, could our last witness answer the question? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Just to add one piece to that, I think if you're right about, the long-term concerns, if we want to focus on just a few years of where having some security would be very helpful, it's just in those early days of starting your company, as I'm sure you recall from your own story, those are often the most difficult. And for the successful millennial entrepreneurs, then they can start to create more traditional HR platforms and create payroll and things like that. So they might be able to get onto a more normal field of human resources and benefits after they get their startup going for a little bit. So in terms of our policy, if we can figure out a way just to be supportive in those early days, in the first year, 2 years, 3 years, then I think that can have a huge impact.
Thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. And Mr. Morris, I think I'm speaking for a lot of us here, but we got to see this massage chair. So,
it is indeed a rocket ship.
it sounds like it. And I would now like to yield to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member. I thank our expert witness for your testimony today. I just have a quick question as a follow-up to my colleagues. Are all of you paying into Social Security and Medicare?
I am not.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Interesting. Okay. I thought that was something that was mandatory, but I guess not. Let me just ask a couple of questions for this panel, piggybacking off of a question that Ranking Member Velasquez spoke of initially. Some workers in the gig economy classify themselves as small businesses, but they gain neither loyal employees nor control over the product or business that they want to grow. So is it fair for them to be considered small businesses? If not, doesn't that strengthen the argument that they are more like employees? And I want all of you to give some thought to that.
I'm sorry, I missed part of the question.
Sure, okay. Some workers in the gig economy classify themselves as small businesses, but they gain neither loyal employees nor control over the product or business that they want to grow. So they don't have a controlling interest. So is it fair for them to be considered small businesses? If not, doesn't that strengthen the argument that they're more like employees?
At SCORE,
want to answer that?
May I start?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
great.
That was actually for the whole panel.
Okay, I'll kick it off. So at SCORE, we follow the U.S. Small Business Administration's definition of what counts as a small business, which can vary in terms of the number of employees and then the amount of revenue that qualifies. It's widely still accepted that fewer than 500 employees counts as a small business, which a lot of people would argue is quite a broad definition. But we believe that any entrepreneur, whether they are officially a solopreneur or a gig economy worker, could be considered as working for or owning a small business because of the business activities that they engage in. So regardless of their official classification as a sole proprietor or a C Corp or what have you, they are most likely serving multiple clients. They are possibly engaging contractors to support them in their business operations. And they have the ability to keep growing or to fail. So actually 43% of SCORE clients are considered pre-start business owners, meaning they are still in the idea phase. they're planning, they're learning how to structure their business activities to help them achieve success. And we are very proud to support them in their dream of growing or even starting their small business.
Did anyone else want to try at that particular question? I see heads nodding. Okay.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think a lot of our solo entrepreneurs are doing just what you had said, where they are working with multiple clients. They're able to then go into these companies and offer the expertise that they have to help then those companies continue to grow. So classifying them, I think, as small businesses does make sense. Because they are a small business offering a service and then scaling potential other businesses as well. And we see a lot of our solo entrepreneurs actually grow into a more kind of official company with hiring additional either contract employees or hiring employees. So they're using that as a place to kind of spearhead into a larger company.
Larger enterprise. Well, let me ask you, Mr. Olikara, how do we ensure that the gig economy workers get paid and sick leave?
Thank you, Congressman. I think it's a very good question. We're seeing a few models at the state level that we should look at closely, bipartisan models that, again, in the early days of being an entrepreneur, in the state of Washington, for example, they have a bill right now that would require, gig economy services to pay into basically a portable benefits entity that would provide those benefits like childcare, sick leave, et cetera. And then as a result, when they're moving from gig to gig, those benefits would stay with them.
It's portable.
Yeah, it's portable. Exactly. And I think that's good for not only a particular state, but it's good for our whole country because that really helps that entrepreneur have the security to be able to really get their business going. So I think that's one option.
This is a law that they're developing in Washington State?
It hasn't become law yet. It's a bill that's been drafted and introduced. And there are a few examples of that around the country as well.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I thank all of you once again for your expert witness here today.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I don't want to contest your claim about the most amount of millennials, but I will say this, that my district has the youngest age of all districts in Congress at 27 and a half years of age. And certainly we have a lot of millennials in that group. Utah was actually ranked in the top 10 for the best places for millennials. And we're in the top 5 for unemployment for millennials. Now, I know you're looking at me and you're seeing my hairline and my pending AARP age, but I consider myself a millennial. And
Okay.
We accept you, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you. I think if you could see my socks, I like you, I struggle what to watch on Netflix. I mean, I'm right there with all of you. I actually believe being a millennial is far more a state of mind than an age.
Absolutely.
And to demonstrate that, and I'll apologize to my fellow colleagues here who may not be up on their GIFs and their memes, I actually think that me and Steve Buscemi have a lot in common. How do you do, fellow kids, right? Now, with that in mind and my feeling like I have a connection with millennials, I've observed a couple of problems that I'd like to brainstorm with you. And one of them is the seemingly lack of desire or unwillingness to engage in government. And a lot of the things that you're asking for need engagement. They need advocates. Can you give me, from your perspective, anything that you've seen that successfully engages them in government and gets them to care about their congressman or their voting or local officials?
I can take a stab at that. Thank you, Congressman. It's the issue that keeps me up because it has truly been the calling of my life so far to be able to engage millennials in the political process. And the great dichotomy we have in our country today is that you have a highly idealistic generation that has the highest service participation rates in the country, and yet at the same time have the least trust and confidence in government. There is a study from Harvard that showed a majority of millennials don't believe that government and politics will solve the problems that we face. So it's my opinion that the way we start to change that narrative is demonstrate real impact through politics on the issues that matter. And I think this is the perfect example of it. If this committee and this Congress can come together in a nonpartisan fashion to support millennial gig workers, that's an example of impact, and that creates a feeling of motivation for more millennials to engage in government. It is a bit of a chicken and egg problem, as you're referring to, Congressman, because you actually need more engagement, ideally, to get the right policies done. And I just think it really falls on us. It falls on the Millennial Action Project. It falls on members of Congress to be actively engaging millennials in that process.
I agree with you in several areas. One is this is a demographic that is very giving. They'll jump into a cause really very quickly, but to try to get them to jump into a civic government cause is more difficult. And one of my worries is that as we try to get them to do that, or as we pass legislation that would accomplish some of the things, it's going to actually suck the life out of some of the innovation, right, and some of the beauty of what you've got. And we're trying to structure you, right, and part of your success is not being structured. And so, to myself and my colleagues, just a warning that as we try to help you accomplish these goals, we've got to kind of come at it with your mindset rather than our traditional mindset of we're going to structurize this, and it worked for us and it's going to work for you. I don't know if you have any other comments on how do we get them engaged. Another question I would have, I know at least in my district, we don't have near the representation from women in our entrepreneurial demographics, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on that as well.
I can speak to that a little bit. We have found that there's a lot of female entrepreneurs who are under the radar that we don't even really know are there. And so what we have actively tried to do is create opportunities for them to gather and to connect. And so that's what the meetup that we have every month is. So it's like drawing them out and showing that there's resources here available, but there's also a network here to support each other. Or if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, you don't even have to be a small business owner to participate. It's really about saying, how do we cultivate that? And a lot of times it's having some leaders within the community help stand up and help rally women.
I regret that we're out of time, because I would love to continue this discussion and invite all of you to come out to my district in Utah to further this discussion and see if we can help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank all of the folks who are testifying today. I don't necessarily consider myself in that group. I have children and grandchildren who are, though. I was really fascinated by the story about the chair and the work that you're doing with dogs, and I thought you were going to get to where your dogs also participated in the chair and they got a
Oh, absolutely not. The chair's too much money for the dog.
Just for you. Okay, all right. Well, now we've cleared that up. Let me ask Ms. Doggart. I want to basically continue with the discussion about women. Mentoring has been mentioned as a helpful tool, and some studies suggest that women benefit even more from mentoring than men. So how do we better facilitate successful mentorships for millennial women?
Thank you, Congresswoman Adams. I would like to draw your attention to the latest Megaphone of Main Street data report from SCORE, which was on the topic of women's entrepreneurship. I'd be happy to send that your way for more detailed statistics. But basically what that research shows is that women are starting businesses at a much faster rate than men, about 5 times the national average. And yes, that mentoring matters and mentoring works for women entrepreneurs just as it does for all entrepreneurs. One very interesting finding was that women entrepreneurs did not necessarily have more success with women mentors. That was something that we had expected to see and did not see in the research data. More important than the gender of the mentor was the effectiveness of the mentor. 5 characteristics were pulled out as particularly important. Things like their helpfulness, their listening skills, how respectful they were, how accurately they were able to assess an entrepreneur's particular situation with all of its unique challenges and advantages. And last and possibly most important, the ability to provide useful, specialized advice. So that is great news for SCORE because we have always known that mentoring matters because it works. Small businesses are more successful when they have the help of an experienced mentor like the 10,000 that we have at SCORE. And more than half of our clients are women, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to bring in all sorts of different clients and help them however they need to be helped.
Yeah, thank you. I was just really excited about SCORE, and I actually sponsored the bill for that, and I think it's doing a lot of good. So let me ask Ms. Kirby, a mentor relationship adds enormous benefits to any entrepreneur, including building confidence, providing advice, facilitating a larger network, and helping to develop skills. So what are some of the challenges that women face in assessing high-level mentors, in your opinion?
I think that one thing that we've noticed with dealing with female entrepreneurs is the fact that they do like to see other women in leadership roles helping guide them, whether or not the efficiency is there. But just seeing, individuals who are going through similar struggles, who can, as women, we have unique challenges. And so we have found that if we can find women within our community who are leaders within the community to kind of help rally the women who are considering becoming solo, entrepreneurs and or trying to grow a business, if we can try to help pair them up with the resources that we have available. I think, again, it just comes down to access to low-cost, no-cost resources to help women especially connect to what is available there, and really kind of encouraging leaders within our community to help kind of step up and actually give back as well.
Thanks. You can be what you see. Mr. Olikara, how do we ensure that the gig economy workers get paid and sick leave?
I think that's a very good question. Thank you, Congresswoman. I think on this topic of portable benefits, we're seeing some great innovations and experimentations at the state and local level. And I think under business as usual, those benefits are not going to be provided. So I do think there's something we need to do to provide a paid and sick leave to gig economy workers.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, who is a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. I want to let you all know that I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And so, my question, can all of you discuss the future of the gig economy and what role federal regulations play in promoting stiffening the growth of the gig economy?
I can't speak to the federal portion, but as far as the future of the gig economy, I think platforms like what I'm using, Thumbtack, which make it a lot easier to be put out in front of, the bigger businesses that have the $20,000 and $30,000 for advertising. I think with those kind of tools and things, people will start to say, "Oh man, well, I'm great at underwater basket weaving. Somebody wants that," and they can, use a platform like Thumbtack to put their name out there without spending, the $10,000 and $20,000 and get recognized. So I think the more that people start to see that their talent, whatever that may be, can be marketed, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to begin or start, I think that's going to grow the gig or the freelance work exponentially.
Okay, I'd like each one of you to comment on that question. How the federal government, I shouldn't say the federal government, but federal regulations.
Mm-hmm. So our clients tell us that they are not making the decision to start or grow their business based on regulations, changes to the tax code, things like that. We know that it does affect them in their operations, and certainly any policies that are lessening the financial burden for entrepreneurs are a good thing. But when we've asked them, you know, whether some of the bigger changes in the past couple of years are affecting their decision to start or to expand, they tell us that it's really not affecting them on that level. As to the technology portion of your question, I think that's a huge part of why the gig economy is continuing to grow and will continue to grow. The research shows that solopreneur firms are outpacing employer firms in their growth, and that independent workers are also on a strong upward trajectory. And I think technology is a huge part of that, because different tools like video conferencing, even things like online banking and virtual assisting, are making it more possible than ever to efficiently conduct business from anywhere in the world, wherever you want to be working. And all of these tools are only getting better and better as we move forward.
Ms. Kirby, did you want to respond?
I really can't speak to the federal regulation piece, but I think for growth, why we think co-working is such an important, essential role to the growth of the gig economy is the networking that happens and the collaboration that happens within our spaces. We also have a co-working visa program, which allows our members to have access to co-working spaces all over the world when they travel, because you do find a lot of workers within the gig economy are a little more transient. They do travel a good bit as well. And so we want to make sure that they're tapping networks and resources that are available throughout the country and also globally.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll just add a couple quick comments here. Building on what Ms. Kirby mentioned, the most important thing that I think helps, you know, gig economy entrepreneurs is the power of networks, being able to easily get in contact with potential partners, potential buyers, potential vendors, et cetera. We actually work in a co-working space as well. I often talk about the office space dividend when you're surrounded around other entrepreneurs and other startups. The hardest thing for entrepreneurs is often the administrative side of things, which I think does intersect with your question about federal regulations. And I think all of you can probably speak to this. As a young entrepreneur, you get into that, you take the big leap of faith because you care about the mission of what you're trying to do. The whole administrative and compliance aspects of that are not what got you into it in the first place, but are extremely important to be running as a legitimate business. And so I think thinking about those areas where we can streamline federal regulations, I think will have a very strong upward effect for these entrepreneurs.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I can get one answer from this, and I know my time is running out. May I? Recently, we passed a major tax package, which everyone said that it bails out big businesses and they're going to reinvest in the economy and stuff. How does a tax package that we pass really cause any problem for the gig economy? Have you even thought about it?
For me?
Yeah.
Okay. So that question was asked in a different form at a hearing that the entrepreneurial development partners attended with the subcommittee on infrastructure that Congresswoman Adams runs. And the, I think, surprising answer was that it had not, I think there hadn't been enough time for it to affect the business owners' bottom lines, budgets, paychecks, so that the impact hadn't really sunk in yet, because the consensus from them, which is consistent with what our SCORE clients have told us, is that it wasn't having a huge effect on them at the time. Now, we know that, of course, it will have an effect on how they conduct business, possibly who they can hire, but I think it might be a little bit too soon to tell.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had lots of questions from both sides. I think it's been an excellent hearing this afternoon, and that's thanks to the really great panel that we've had here this morning and now into this afternoon. The gig economy in some form, or called perhaps by some other name, has been with us for a long time, but with the growing importance of millennials in the American economy, it's even more important and growing all the time. So it's important for us to understand its role and to be able, through the policies that we impact on here in this committee and with the committees that we interact in, whether it's tax policy or regulations or access to capital, to understand it. And you've really helped us to do that. So I want to thank each and every one of our panelists here for really great testimony here this morning. especially the one from William and Mary. But, you know, you guys were all great. All great. Go Tribe. And I would ask unanimous consent that members may have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting records, supporting materials for the record without objection so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.